Clark, Bruce Conner, and Hollis Frampton. Currently, he's at work co-authoring the second volume of the catalog raisonné for the films of Andy Warhol, published by the Whitney Museum of Art and Yale University Press. And today, Bruce is going to be giving a lecture called I'm Not Bruce Conner. He is Bruce Jenkins, and I'll let him jump into it.
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Diana, and also Fatima for your kind invitation. And really also thank all of you for coming out on a Monday afternoon to learn about an artist who is not as well known as he should be. And I hope that by the end of the session you'll get a sense of it. Let me also say, just this may seem kind of simple, but one thing that I wish wouldn't be a part of this is how high-tech it is. In other words, we're video conferencing, I'm using a PowerPoint. Bruce Conner, too, worked in moving image. But you have to think of this as very lo-fi material, and also very personal. And also, my relationship to it equally is very personal. And so I'm gonna sort of ask you, or I'm gonna give my apologies for it seeming to be very 21st century high-tech social media, when it really is very hand-wrought, very heartfelt, very person-to-person, very much engaged on things that are at a much more fundamental level, and they're not necessarily digital compatible. Okay? But also let me say that I have never been to the Philippines, but I have had the pleasure of spending time with an extraordinary artist, and I'm going to ask for my first slide to come up. It should say digression, Kidlat me. And it's because I've had, over the last 30-some years, a chance to do several projects with Kidlat Tahimik. And I'm going to ask if you would switch slides. I'm going to have a slide of Kidlat in his traditional loincloth, holding up an eyepiece and a 9.5 vintage camera. This was taken at the Walker Art Center up in Minneapolis in October of 1989, right, almost 30 years ago. Kidlat was doing an artist residency with us. Switch to the next slide, you can see him with more contemporary-looking media. And these were just set up in the studio, something that he wanted to do as part of the project. But the last slide actually tells the story of where he really is. And if you look, you'll see that he's on the terrace of the Walker Art Center. We've just had the blizzard of Halloween 1989. And it is not only chilly out there, but it's also thick with snow. And Kidlat wanted to have that experience as well, going to the Twin Cities and being engaged by the environment. And I say that not only because, he's an extraordinarily important artist, but I think there are some similarities between Kidlat's practice and Bruce Conner's practice. And to the extent that you may have some sense of Kidlat's practice, I'd say that first and foremost, they both work with what we call vernacular materials. That is, they work with very common stuff. They don't work with necessarily high-end, high-concept, high art. They tend to work with things that are ready to hand. They work in a way that we sometimes call bricolage, right? They put together things that are right there, and it's possible for them to work very cheaply and to work locally, and yet through their artistry, reach an international audience. So let's go to the next slide and you'll see what I mean. Bruce Conner was first and foremost a collagist. He stuck things together. This is from a two-sided painting. This is the rear side and back side of his two-sided painting. It was done in the late 50s. I think it completed in 1961. And you'll see it's full of stuff, right? It has clippings from movie magazines, particularly sci-fi films. It has Stag or Men's Magazine images. It also has, if you look closely, some of Bruce Conner's personal heroes. There's an image of Ezra Pound, Sigmund Freud. It also has labels that are connected a little bit with art. Sometimes when you look at the back of a painting, you'll see I'm using a label that may say fragile. It may have some information about it. Finally, there's a personal component because there are a couple of documents there that relate to Bruce Conner directly, including his draft board notification. This was during the era in the United States where there was a mandatory draft for military service, and that document, or one of those documents, is also affixed to the back of it. So when we talk about collage, Bruce Conner, first and foremost, begins in collage, and this is 2D work, right? It's there sitting on a flat surface. Next slide. It's equally at working in 3D, right? Assemblages and sculptures. And this one called Snore from the late 1950s is a really good example. It's basically, again, simple materials. He often went to thrift shops. He scavenged areas in the Bay Area that were being torn down. These gorgeous Victorian houses called Painted Ladies were being hauled down so that, basically so that neighborhoods would be gentrified. So these old, really, charming, lovely houses were being torn down. And Conner would go there and begin to scavenge for wallpaper samples or pieces of wood. And if you see Snore, you'll see it has that kind of material in it. It's on a reclaimed wooden base, and the main body of this piece is shrouded in a nylon stocking, wooden stocking. Okay, let's go down to the third one under there. You'll see, we sometimes talk about moving images as 4D, right? So he's been a collage artist working in 2D. He's done assemblage work in 3D. But he's also worked in 4D in the time arts. And this is a poster for the New York Film Festival. He was commissioned to do this. And it is also a film called the 10-second film. And he was, I think, quite interested in making available for a viewer his artistic process. He often said that his films are collages, and there's no better sense of what he means than to look at this poster, and then if you go to the next image, we'll look at the actual film. So if you click on that, we have a 10-second film by Bruce Conner. And you can see, if we're there, saying to you, what were the materials? How did he make that film? I'd have people raise their hand, but you can clearly see that he's using what we would call, sort of material out of the cutting room or off the cutting room floor. There's countdown leader, there's lap markings. If you know something about film production, there's always a clapperboard placed in front of an actor's face, typically so that the role can be synced up with the soundtrack. All of these are elements that are excised from mainstream film, and so that which was seen as being superfluous, useless, ephemeral, trash in terms of mainstream film become the working materials for Bruce Conner in this moving image, let's call it 4D collage. So you can see that at the basis of his work is this interest in putting together and assembling materials that have been sourced, basically sourced from areas of the culture where they have very little value or held in very low esteem. And the nature of his work is in some ways to not only reclaim those, but to give them value. And also, I think, to show you what he often called the secret language of film, right? When you actually are involved in filmmaking, you actually see all of these marks that labs put on the films that have been processed and developed and printed. These are marks that are there for the projectionist. This is basically what he sometimes calls the taboo area that you're not supposed to see. It's not available for the public. But for him, it was something that he wanted to share, like the back of a painting. Just as he wanted you to see the back of the painting, he's allowing you to see some of the materials that are, you might say, a little bit off limits for most film audiences. Let's move on. You see what the next image is. I'm actually doing it here myself. Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about Bruce Conner, Bruce Conner's story. Bruce Conner, and this is what I call a little pocket bio. Bruce Conner was born in the year 1933, small town of McPherson, Kansas, but he was raised in the larger city of Wichita. He went to university at the University of Nebraska. He earned a BFA, so he earned an art degree in 1956, and he immediately set out to what was, when you were in the West Coast at that time, the Mecca for artists, San Francisco. And San Francisco in the late 1950s was still very much involved in the beat era of culture. So it was a great place for poets and musicians and people involved in the arts. It was a very exciting place for a young artist to set up his practice. And Bruce Conner joined a community of painters and visual artists, performers, musicians, poets, and was very much part of that scene. He began making work, really as you saw in somewhere, using cast-off materials that you would find in thrift shops, or going again to these demolition sites in neighborhoods that were being urban renewed and gentrified. And most famously working with materials like nylon stockings. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll begin to see something about his career. Bruce Conner had, you might say, an iconoclastic side. That is, he was never very comfortable with all of the trappings of the art world. This is a San Francisco Examiner review of a marathon art show at the Batman Gallery in San Francisco. And ostensibly, that's Bruce Conner in the picture, holding up some art objects, talking. Behind him is a suitcase from his Mexican work. But that's not Bruce Conner. That is a double stand-in. He often would set up, he often would send other artists or sometimes even art students to impersonate him. He was not fond of the show and tell aspects of being an artist. And so this is a brother of an artist who he asked, when the press come, you simply show up and tell them you're Bruce Conner. Whatever you want to say about the work is fine with me. Okay, move to the next slide. Here's a much more ambitious project. We're moving into the late 1960s. A fellow Kansan, the actor Dennis Hopper, actor/director at this point, Bruce Conner had proposed to his gallerist in New York to do a series of engraving collages, right? These were going to be collages that were based on 19th century wood engravings, very kind of slight surreal material, and he would put them out under Dennis Hopper's name. In fact, the collection was called Dennis Hopper One-Man Show. His gallerist absolutely refused. Because how can you put out work, in the name of another artist? So it took Bruce Conner, I think, about 5 or 6 years to finally get someone to do it. If you go to the next slide, you'll see Dennis Hopper, One-Man Show, and now it's got Bruce Conner's name on it, Volume 1, 1971. There were 2 other volumes. I'm going to show you what this work looked like. If you go down to the next slide, you'll see one of the first pieces in it, and they are very subtle. It's almost impossible, even when you look very carefully, to see where the collage elements are. But these are essentially 19th century 19th century prints that Bruce Conner is very subtly altered. They take on, in many cases, a real surreal, almost Max Ernst-like quality to them. There's one more that I think is a little more vivid. You can definitely tell there's been, we would say, some intervention. It's a little Monty Python-ish with these 2 men engaged in some kind of warfare using a strange array of instruments, and also something has happened to their heads, which have been replaced by charts and cogs. So this kind of gives us a little bit of a sense of Bruce Conner being this, a little bit of an outsider, a little bit of what we sometimes say a square peg in a round hole, and a little bit of a resistor to the art world. That's really how I first encountered him. So about a decade after Kahima came to the Walker Art Center, the museum put on this show. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a book. I've got actually a copy of it here, called 2000 BC, The Bruce Conner Story, Part 2. Slightly wordy title. And we're saying that Bruce Conner was very resistant to doing a museum show. He had turned down any number of major museums who wanted to do exhibitions with him. He finally agreed to do this at the Walker, but he had some stipulations. First stipulation is the name of the show would be The Bruce Conner Story, Part 2. Of course, there was never a Part 1, and that was part of the fiction. Bruce Conner really wanted to, in some ways, interfere with the system of exhibitions or the kind of framework in which we look at exhibitions. He also wanted to take the pressure off of us and off of him. The thing he did not want to have was a retrospective, that we would be seeing, so to speak, all of his work. Even though the show, in fact, had from every medium that he had been engaged in for almost a half century, this was only going to be a portion. And he claimed that there would have been a Part 1 and a Part 3 and a Part 4, all the way to Part 7. Of course, those are fictions. Let's move on to the next slide. He also required that the hardbound version of the book have an embossed stamp placed on the first page. Actually, you can see it's black on black. And if you can read it, it says, not a retrospective. Not once, but twice. He just thought that if he had a retrospective, it basically meant his career was over. That there was no more, there was no future to his practice. He just didn't want to be, so to speak, absorbed. He didn't want to have that museumization and canonization take over his active art practice. If you move on one more, you'll see that he was absolutely right about this being called the Bruce Conner Story Part 1. Here's a little hand-done sign that the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Chicago had to put up on the table adjacent to the books so that people would not come up to the counter and ask for the Bruce Conner Story Part 1. So here you see the Bruce Conner Story. There is no Part 1. So Bruce Conner was indeed that kind of corrosive aspect of his place in the art world was definitely intact with this particular strategy of naming the show. Okay, but if you go to the next slide, you'll see that indeed he did show up wearing his best suit. If you look on the right, that's me. A little bit younger. What's interesting is I'm leaning against a Chuck Close painting that actually looks much like I look now. It's as if Chuck Close had read my future. Next to me is Joe Loftus, one of the co-curators. We all spent 4 years together working on this. We'd often be in contact with Bruce Conner by phone once a week. And on the far side of Bruce Conner is Peter Boswell, who'd done his master's thesis on Bruce. And was, I think, about to go into a doctoral program when he ended up working as a curator instead. I used to say he was Bruce Conner's Boswell, meaning he was his confidant. All right, we'll move on. Talk a little bit about why Bruce Conner had this attitude. Why was he such a resistor? Wouldn't an artist want to be in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art? Wouldn't a young artist? He was in his late 20s when the Museum of Modern Art not only included him in a major show, but bought a piece of his for their permanent collection. And let's go to the next one. This is the piece they bought. It's called Child. It's from 1959. It's a rather gruesome piece, and it's very much the kind of work that Bruce Conner was making at this time. You can see, again, the same kinds of materials. Everything is scavenged or salvaged or reclaimed, or nylon stockings kind of holding its figure. This is a work about a child molester / kidnapper who was on death row in California. It was a really sensational case. And Bruce Conner was very interested in the case because he was also against capital punishment. So part of it was this desire to have an artwork that had a level of social engagement, in which the heart punishment kind of outweighs the horror of whatever crime was involved. And this is kind of his, in some ways, his, I think, very passionate protest. So the Museum of Modern Art is also a wax figure, very delicate. Museum of Modern Art purchased it, and it went into art storage. It was never shown. And Bruce Conner was beside himself. He had no access to it anymore. It had no visibility, no public presentation, and he was basically furious with the museum. And it really, again, you know, at a point where an artist wants to be, you know, moving forward with his career, he actually got kind of undone by the fact that he felt that the museum had betrayed him in buying and essentially disappearing this piece. One other aspect to, I think, his disaffection, if we go to the next slide, Bruce Conner became critically associated with a movement of California art that had the unsavory name of funk art. Imagine working for a decade now, making work in all sorts of media, being in some ways very individualistic about your practice, and then being painted as part of a movement, in fact, being painted as the leader of this movement of something called funk art. And so this was a show that was done in, I think, 1970 or 71 at the Berkeley Museum of Art, University Art Museum in Berkeley, by Bruce Selt. And here's, you know, another, if you go down one more, there's another installation shot of it. And you can see it's we would say a mixed bag of work. It seems to have a kind of, you know, some of it is technological. Much of it, though, is like Bruce Conner, bricolage, things that have been very simply sourced and gathered. Things that also seem, you know, maybe they're bohemian, maybe they're colorful, maybe they're a little bit, George Sells talked about them being loud and a little bit emphatic and having a kind of, a kind of affect that was noisy and irreverent. If you go one more slide down, you'll see the panel for the opening day of this show. There in the second from the left is Bruce Conner. Looks rather uncomfortable and a little bit glum. You can see he's got his hands up on his shoulders, and he's basically, hearing what's being said about the work, and not, at the end of the day, very happy to either be in that show or to be seen as a kind of leader of something called funk art. So again, one of the reasons I think he was unhappy about, let's call it his success in the art world, is that it come at a certain price. One of his most important pieces was now stuck in art storage in a major museum. He was part of a movement that was sort of disdainfully named funk art, and he just felt that it was a way of kind of constraining and pigeonholing him that really felt to him inauthentic and undeserved. So my next slide is part 5 of my talk, or my 5th chapter, Why a Duck, or Bruce Conner Filmmaker. Now, you have to realize that back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, it's actually not until the 1990s that if you were working in film or working in video, that there was any interest by museums, by collectors, by curators, by critics in work. Film was seen as being kind of outside the domain of fine arts. We know from ourselves that film typically means commercial cinema, it typically means Hollywood, typically means mainstream, and the people who are working in experimental film, that's something so marginal, really not warrant a great deal of attention. And indeed, it was kind of free. It was free for a lot of artists to pick up a camera, put down the paintbrush, put down the chisel, and begin working in film. And Bruce Conner, early on, felt the need to work in film. Let's go to the next slide. It's just an image of Larry Jordan, who was a San Francisco-based animator and experimental filmmaker. When Bruce Conner arrived in 1957, he had never taken a class in filmmaking. They didn't exist at universities at that time. He didn't even own a camera. He had no equipment. And basically, he had nothing but the desire to make a film. He'd been a lifelong film buff, a At university, he started a couple of film societies. He was kind of saw in that, in the humor in that.
Bruce, we're so sorry. We lost you for a little bit after you talked. We lost you right after we came back from Groucho.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Truly funny. Joke is that what he basically asked was, the cut is to especially an assembly of stock footage. Does that come through okay?
Yeah, that came through okay. Whoa, what is going on?
Real array of supposed helpers, including, from a Jungle Picture, heard of it.
But we need to listen to him first before we go into the movie.
Impact. In other words, this is anti-war, and part of the desire is to use, in this case, humor as a strategy, humor as a weapon. And so what he did was, if we go to the next slide, he began working very cheaply, right? He bought a series of compilations, capacity to actually. She had the capacity to 8mm film and then blown out to 16. If we go down to Cassidy, hope you're seeing how long Cassidy, and this is, these were films that part of a film program. Anyway, so he had a group of Hopalong Cassidy westerns. Let's move down one more. There's that elephant, right? They say almost the same elephant we saw in Duck Soup. So he also found a film that had called Thrills and Spills. And basically, it was a kind of compilation of animal scenes and also of vehicles. You go down one more, you'll see a tank about to run over the camera. You go down one more, you'll see a piece of footage from a German propaganda film that he had access to. So actually, the German propaganda film is the beginning of a very famous sequence. If you were a film student in the U.S. at a certain point, let's say you took an introduction to film, or you took an introduction to film editing, or to the avant-garde, you almost certainly saw a movie, and you almost certainly had the professor or instructor spend some time on the sequence. So let's look at the sequence. The first shot is a U-boat captain looking through the periscope. Let's go down one more. Cut is to the point of view shot. What is he looking at? He's looking at a woman in a stag movie, right? Cut down one more. Don't have the third shot. The third shot with the torpedoes. Actually, it was another close-up of the U-boat captain, and a shot of the torpedoes being launched, kind of phallic symbol. And then the fourth shot in the sequence was basically these underwater explosion, this Bikini Atoll atomic bomb testing. So it was this very odd, funny mashup of war and sexuality, of basically sex and death coming together in this moment in Bruce Gunner's movie. Now the good thing is, and I have to give a shout out to extraordinary woman who's been working in the decade that Bruce Gunner's been has passed. Michelle Silva has been managing the CONNER estate, and she very kindly lent us access to beautiful, I don't know if they're 4K, but beautiful transfers. So if you go to the next one, we're going to see the first 2.5 minutes of Bruce Conner's movie, and it was set to, as you'll hear, set to Respighi's Pines in Rome, which happened to be playing on the radio as he was assembling the film, and he decided, hey, this sounds like movie music. And so this is the opening where we get, as you'll see, the beginning of that use of stock footage that he saw in the Marx Brothers film. So let's go with the opening of a movie.
Yep, you're back.
Okay, well, again, you can see that Connor had learned he learned very well the lessons from the Marx Brothers film. That if you match direction and action, you can cut together disparate materials. So the Marx Brothers, had porpoises and airplanes and tanks and soldiers and swimmers all going to their rescue, and Connor follows suit and creates this completely strange and wonderful mashup of all of these modes of kind of mechanized weapons and mechanized 19th and 20th century vehicles that are kind of all rushing forward. And his basic notion is that the country was rushing toward, it was almost like this kind of madness that was in the air, this kind of rushing toward its own demise. And what's important to know about Connor, this was not simply, a kind of convenient politic, or this was not something that he was dabbling in. He truly believed that the country was in trouble. He truly believed that there was going to be, this was very much a kind of moment in the Cold War, that there was going to be imminent conflict between the East and the West, and that the only place that he would be safe, he and his wife Jean, is if they left the Bay Area and they went down to Mexico, and they began to, and they would live safely in small towns in Mexico. And so they did just that. They sold everything that they had and took, a few personal things with them and moved in 1961 down to Mexico and lived for the next year and a half in small towns in Mexico. So this is my heading south is the designation. But if you go down one more past that to 44, you'll see an image of the kind of artwork that Bruce Jenkins was making in this period. You see some of the iconography of religious art that he was seeing as part of the culture, much more vivid colors that were part of the Mexican art and artifact crafts that he was seeing, entered into his own work. If you go down one more, you'll see he didn't have very much to work with. The first one was his suitcase. Here's a pair of his shoes that are then turned into an assemblage piece, again painted with these vivid colors, with I think some religious iconography connected perhaps to those beads, and beginning to kind of, you might say, channel some of the Mexican art and culture, high and low, religious and secular, into his art making. Let's go down one more. Even his filmmaking would change. Now, Bruce Connor had only made a handful of films, but they were always in black and white, right? And they often used appropriated images. He shot some film, but most of his films were made up of found footage, right? Compilation reels, the detritus off the editing room floor. Suddenly, he's making films, he's shooting films, and he's shooting them in vivid color. If you go down one more, you can see just a frame of this very beautiful moving image of a woman walking across a small street. Go down one more, and you'll see a man, we glimpse him for maybe a second. That's Timothy Leary. Right? He was a Harvard professor who was the one who coined the phrase, turn on, tune out, I'm really doing it badly. Drop out, turn on, tune in, something like that. But basically he was an advocate of using LSD, using hallucinogens to expand one's consciousness. He was down in Mexico, as the title of the film is called, Looking for Mushrooms, suggests, looking for magic mushrooms. So this is a very different kind of Bruce Connor film, and in his entire body of films, it's the only one quite like it. And I said to Michelle Silva, I thought it was really important for us to have a chance to see it. And it was re-released in the 1990s, and in order for people to actually see it clearly, Bruce Conner slowed it down by a factor of 5. Also changed the soundtrack. But I thought, if you really could understand what this Mexican period was like, and the kind of both visionary, this is the kind of almost visionary, slightly hallucinatory road picture. And if you're really going to get that sense of it, you needed to see the original cut. And this is done with a Beatle soundtrack for which John Lennon personally gave Bruce Conner the rights to use. So if you could have one more, we'll actually have a chance to see, it's about 3.5 minutes long, all of Looking for Mushrooms, which is literally quite a trick. So keep your eyes tuned on the screen and let's go with Looking for Mushrooms. It's a different soundtrack on it. But this is really, there's a power in this. It's a vibrant palette that he's working with, and the speed for me is kind of important. And I hope you get the sense that you're seeing a collage, and it's running through the projector, right? And so part of it is just that notion of all of these different pieces of material that have been edited, mostly, almost, I think, in this film, entirely in camera. He's also making double and triple exposures, running the film back and forth in the camera, giving you these extraordinary effects. So it's a film that has a great deal of content. That's why he wanted to slow it down. But in showing it this way, again, it's kind of collage-like aspects for me come to the fore. So moving on with Bruce Conner, this is early 1960s. If we move down one more slide, we'll get my chapter 7, Contesting Camelot. When Conner decided that it was time to come back to the U.S., he didn't want to go back to the Bay Area. So instead he went to Brookline, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. In fact, if you go into the next slide, you'll see that here's a grant. He received the grant from the Ford Foundation, and he said, if you look at the third paragraph, excuse me, the third column, it says, Bruce Conner of Brookline, Massachusetts, has made a film called Cosmic Ray, a movie. He's got a 1-year fellowship for an experimental filmmaking. So he had gotten money from the Ford Foundation to make an experimental film. The film, as it turned out, would be very much based on where he was living. He was living in Brookline, Massachusetts in 1963, only a few blocks from the boyhood home of the then President John F. Kennedy. While they were living in Brookline, Kennedy is assassinated. He's assassinated in November of 1963, about a week after Bruce Conner turned 30. And for Bruce Conner, that turning 30 was a kind of pivotal moment, and that Kennedy would be assassinated within a week seemed to him to have a kind of deeper meaning. I mean, the entire country, I was just a kid then, the entire country was traumatized by the assassination. But Bruce Conner took it personally. So he decided that he would spend a year in Brookline, Massachusetts, and make a very careful document, a report about all the things that were happening in the year after Kennedy was assassinated. So if we go to the next slide, this is the title from it. It was going to be a report, and he decided that he would try to get the footage of the assassination. He tried to get other footage that the news the news reports were 24/7, so to speak, showing the assassination, showing the aftermath. If you go one more slide, you'll see a piece, a very rare piece. This is a film installation piece. That's Bruce Conner standing next to it. The piece consists of 2 parts. It's a vintage 60s era television set. The screen has been painted out, and what's projecting on it is an 8mm film of all the footage that Bruce Conner began shooting off of television. He began shooting it on his 16mm camera, and he then made these little 8mm condensations of it. And the piece consists of those, the first 2 or 3 days of news footage off of the television, now projected back onto the TV. It's an extraordinary piece, and he's actually then took that footage and made an assassination. But this is the first piece that he made. The second piece is really the piece that, and here, if you go down one more, you'll see just what those images look like. They're very grainy. They're shot off of a 60s era television. And he was particularly interested in, he was a juxtaposition of Kennedy at the podium, obviously very much alive earlier in his presidency. And then right after that is a shoe commercial. He's very much interested in the commercialization of the presidency, and you might say the commercialization of Kennedy's assassination, because this became part of television programming. It was, it was compelling TV, and it was interrupted periodically by commercials. And this was the beginning of what he felt was the birth of the Kennedy myth. His whole notion was that there was something wrong in society that was so obsessed with its leaders. And part of what he ended up doing was making an argument in his film report, that basically made our fascination with Kennedy part of the, not part of the problem, but one of the factors that led to his death. And I'm kind of simplifying. Let's go down to the next slide. When he went to get access to what was called the Zapruder footage, it was color home movie footage taken by a dry cleaner who would come out to see Kennedy pass by in limousine. It turned out that he also captured on his Super 8 film this, this 8mm film. He captured in color the actual moments of the assassination, of the actual bullets going in. That footage was no longer available. Time magazine had bought it, and the government then seized it. So all Bruce Gunner had was access to some very modest materials. So you get the limousine, and if you cut down to if you go down to the next slide, you'll see there's also a little bit of footage of the gun of the police finding the gun, the weapon, in the Texas Book Depository. Go down to the next slide, though, and you'll see what he begins to really work with. There's our countdown leader, right? Which he begins to use very dramatically, because there's a number of timing devices that connect. And, raising the president to the hospital and waiting for a word from the medical team. Go down to the next one, and you'll see that Kennedy's Roman Catholicism, the fact that he was the first Roman Catholic president, was very much part of the Kennedy myth. And so now these targets that are used to help focus the film, right? They're just for the projections. They're part of that taboo language of film, or secret language of film that we as viewers never see. It's there. He works with that, and it's now part of, it kind of a stand-in for Kennedy and Catholicism. You'll see that there are holes in it, as if they're bullet holes that he's punched into those crosses, or those crosshairs that are used for again, guiding projection. Move down another one, and we'll see the second part of the film as he tries to understand what's happened to Kennedy. And he begins to posit this notion that our consumer culture and the desire for this perfect couple has led to the assessment. He has this image of a woman opening up a refrigerator, right, from an ad. And it's really about this American lifestyle that feels that has betrayed the politics, and it's also led to, again, the assassination. Go down one more, and you get these buttons. And these buttons are connected to an IBM console that's part of basically a stock trading room. And there's a woman who operates it, who becomes a character in the film. What I've asked Michelle to let us see is the second half of the film. The first half is the assassination, choose those very simple materials. We hear a recording of essentially radio reporters reporting on the limousine, and reporting on the shooting, and reporting on the hospital. And then basically, once they announce that he's dead, we have this kind of reprise. And the second half of the film is this meditation on the Kennedy era and on the commercialization of the presidency. And it's this part of the film that drew extraordinary criticism. Connor would show this film. It took him about 6 years, make you one math. It took him 4 years to finish it. He would show this film, and audiences in the Boston area would get up and storm the projection booth. In fact, any number of times that he had to kind of basically lock himself in the projection booth to save both himself and the print from being seized by unhappy viewers. Because it's a very corrosive, basically a very corrosive lesson that he's giving viewers. So let's take a look. If we go down one more, we'll see, or actually if you click on the buttons there, we'll see the last 2.5 minutes of
and the trip downtown to the trademark.
Slightly corrosive reading. Yes. Anyway, it's a very powerful film, and I didn't want to have it be the sort of last thing we see. So I decided, I'm going to shift gears. This PowerPoint, you'll see, Hey Music Lover. One of the things that I noticed, there was a kind of through line for all of Bruce Conner's work, maybe with Report being an exception, is his use of appropriated music. Music was very important to Bruce Conner in his life, and many of his films are about music, utilize music, involve musicians or singers. So I want us to go and look at a little bit of a different side to Bruce Conner. The first image I have is from the Avalon Ballroom, and it's actually this period of Bruce Conner's work we don't have very much documentation from, but essentially when Bruce Conner left Boston in 1965 and returned to San Francisco, he decided that he no longer wanted to make films. He wanted to, in fact, engage in moving image in a very different way. He began working night at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco, basically doing light shows. Right? And so they would do light shows. Let's get the next slide. For Jazz Joplin. Go down one more. They light shows for the Doors. Excuse me, for the Jefferson Airplane. Go down one more. They do light shows for the Doors. And so Conner would actually be projecting sometimes his own films as background, as well as doing like light crystal and other kinds of strobe lights. And he said, he was interviewed by Rolling Stone. He said, I was not inspired to spend a month in a dark room editing a film for 2.5 minutes. I could be spending every night doing this live. So this was actually a period of more than a year when he stopped making films and began doing essentially live, almost performative presentations of his films, kind of immersive presentations of his films with the group at the Avalon Ballroom. Let's go down one more. He made one film during this period that is, in fact, true music video. It's called Breakaway. It's with this dancer, singer, choreographer, Tony Basil. Tony Basil was actually involved in a number of Hollywood films as choreographer, a performer. She had a pop single. Go down one more. And this is from the film that Bruce Conner made called Breakaway. Now, we're never going to look at Breakaway, but I could not resist. There's a little bit of home movie footage of the making of Breakaway. It's the third image now. And it's Bruce Conner and Tony Basil dancing. It's like literally about 13 seconds long, but it's so wonderful to see Bruce Conner so engaged in music. And I have to say, this little piece of footage is the only piece of footage I've also come across. We actually see him holding the camera. So it's both him dancing with Tony Basil and him holding the camera. And again, it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure. section of, it's from a documentary about Bruce Conner. Completely charming, and it's a clip that I absolutely adore, because you can see that this is someone who genuinely was engaged by, in this case, pop music, but also very much working all aspects of filmmaking, both a shooter and a cutter in the parlance of filmmaking. I'm going to be wrapping up soon, but I wanted to emphasize this relationship that he had to musicians and composers. Take the next slide. This is an image from probably his most, I think his most accomplished work. This is from a 30-minute or 36-minute film called Crossroads. It's made up entirely of footage, of government footage from the Bikini Atoll bomb test, 1947. This is the most photographed and most filmed event in the history, right? The government, I don't remember how many cameras were used, but there was an extraordinary amount of footage. Conner had received a grant for a Ateneo project, and essentially was able to buy a good deal of footage in 35 millimeters, its own 35 millimeter film. And with that footage, as he'd like to say, only the splices were his. He assembled the footage, and then he went, let's go down to the next slide, he went and he commissioned a score by two leading new music composers, Terry Riley, of course, the legendary figure, and Patrick Gleason, who he worked with in the Bay Area. And these two composers made very different kinds of scores. The Patrick Gleason score almost sounds like it's the sound of the actual detonation, and it's got all sorts of, using a synthesizer, it's got all sorts of sounds that sound as if we're watching sync sound footage. Terry Riley is a very meditative piece, and it gives this footage kind of depth and power that really is unexpected. It's a mesmerizing, immersive experience to see Crossroads, and I can't really capture any of it for you here, but I wanted at least to mention in terms of this aspect of Bruce Conner's career. Look down one more, and you'll start to see that he was not only interested in the music, but interested in some of the kind of more eccentric figures. Devo, and going to a place called Mabuhay Gardens, which is a club. Go down one more, and you'll have Devo, for those of you who no longer remember this group from, I think, Akron, Ohio, who had a particular kind of proto-punk sound. And he made a single film with them, essentially a music video of one of their hits called Mongoloid. And I have to say, if you're depressed or unhappy, it's one of those films that it's remarkably astute. It's about the same issues that you can see going on in a movie, which is his resistance to the conformist culture that he saw around him. Now using this song to kind of propel it. So let's click down one more, and let's take a look at night. And I've got for you all, I think, 3.5 minutes of Bruce Conner's Mongoloid. Let's go down to the next slide. He also was working with Brian Hill and David Byrne. In 1981, he did a music video based on their work called America's Waiting. Take a little image from that. So he used kind of some scientific material that he reworked. And then, interestingly enough, go down one more. He begins shooting both black and white color photography. He's in his mid-50s now, and he's going out late at night to these punk clubs and just documenting the scene. Go down one more and you'll see 3 images from, again, another one of those encounters with punk performers. We're almost at the end. If you go down to number 9, I am Bruce Conner. I want to end just with a letter from Bruce Conner. This was on his 67th birthday, the year 2000, November. He wrote me, I had moved on from the Walker. And just the part that I really love is near the end. He says he wants to share with me the way in which he's now characterized by the media based on having been in a group show at the Whitney Museum called Beat Culture. He says, I am an artist and anti-artist. No shrinking ego, modest, a feminist, a profound misogynist, a romantic, a realist, a surrealist, a funk artist, conceptual artist, minimalist, postmodernist, beatnik, hippie, punk, subtle, confrontational, believable, paranoid, courteous, difficult, forthright, impossible to work with, accessible, obscure, precise, contrary, elusive, spiritual, profane, a renaissance man of contemporary art, and one of the most important artists in the world. My work is described as beautiful, horrible, hogwash, genius, wandering, precise, quaint, avant-garde, historical, hackneyed, masterful, trivial, intense, mystical, virtuosic, bewildering, absorbing, concise, absurd, amusing, innovative, nostalgic, contemporary, iconoclastic, sophisticated, trash, masterpieces. Best wish, Bruce Conner. Go down one more, and we'll say good night, good morning, Bruce Conner. So thank you.
Great, I'll just move up here. Bruce, we'll keep it short because I know it's past midnight for you. But I thought, there's a couple strands that I thought could be interesting to draw out a bit in advance of our show opening here in the Philippines. So on February 23rd, or 24th, at Builidng's Outpost, we're going to be opening a show called Bruce Conner Out of Body. And I think, beyond the Mabuhay Gardens reference, something that's interesting about Bruce here in the Philippines are the connections he has to Eastern spiritual practices. So I wanted to talk a little bit, at least for the audience here, about his out-of-body experience he had when he was 11. And then I thought we could talk a bit about this idea of getting beyond the person and into the work. Maybe talk a bit about the aliases he worked with and how he tried to make it less about him and more about this timeless idea of work. So to quote this letter or this experience he had, this is something that Bruce wrote. It was when I was about 11 years old. I was in my room in the house in the late afternoon. Sun was shining through the window. I was lying on the floor, and I was looking out across the rug at the light on the floor. I went into a state of consciousness which I couldn't describe afterwards. I changed. I changed physically. I changed conceptually, and it took hundreds of years. I changed and grew old through all kinds of experiences in worlds of totally different dimensions. And then I became aware of myself being in the room. Here I am in a room, and I'm enormously old. How can I ever get up? I'm practically disintegrated. I'm an ancient person. My bones are falling apart. I can't move. And then I slowly become aware of the rug. I look at my hands and they're not old. I knew I was an old ancient person, but I didn't look that way. I didn't understand what had happened, and I wanted to talk to someone about it. I couldn't. There weren't words to describe the experience. The only thing I could think of was saying it was like a dream. It wasn't a dream, but very real. It wasn't science fiction. There were so many things that were unknown secrets that adult society knew, and they didn't let children know about. I thought this was one of them. So Bruce, maybe if you could talk a little bit about, this experience and how it pertains to the film work, and maybe tie it into Easter Morning, which was his last film, which we'll also be showing in our space as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really compelling part of his practice, and one that wouldn't have, I think, translated very well doing it quite this way. And it's really part of there's a kind of intimacy in a lot of his work. Two things really. One, I'll pull this up. This is a man who called him funk artist, but it also got him into the Museum of Modern Art's collection, right? And so Peter Snell's in this book, there's just a couple of pages about Bruce CONNER, but one of the things he says that completely of a piece with what you're talking about is that in his mind, Bruce CONNER was very closely related to the painter Mark Rothko. And he saw in Mark Rothko's a truly spiritual dimension. Of course, Rothko ends up doing these incredibly important paintings in Houston, right, for the Untitled Chapter, that are really evocative of this sense of transcendence. And we see this in some of Bruce's work, Easter Morning. I absolutely adore moments in Breakaway. In the most secular work he did, this film about, it's basically Tony Basil dancing up a storm. But there are moments where where her body almost turns into this kind of veil. And it's those moments where it's about human release, about moving on into a spiritual domain. Of course, the other work, which I didn't show at all, of those angel
They're showing us too.
signs, yes, full body signs, rayographs, right? Where it kind of lays across a huge piece of photographic paper and it composes, and you get these incredible negative images of him in various ways, one of which is explicitly Christ-like. They're called angels, so it's unmistakable that they're actually about this other domain. I also will say I'm very fond of a moment that happens. There are two films he does in the mid-70s that are much slower than anything that I showed you. One is called Valse Prise, right, the kind of set to a waltz tune, and the other one is called 510 to Dreamland. And 510 to Dreamland is just a compilation of all this material he'd been saving. He'd been assembling these reels of just stock footage. There was something about them. They didn't really connect in any meaningful way, but there's a moment where he has an image of a rocket being launched. And you're starting to see it go in the sky, and it again it wavers between being sort of solid and waves, and it almost turns into this kind of almost spiritual image, again a kind of image of transcendence, or perhaps of an angel or of a spirit.
Yeah, and I think this idea of transcending the ego is something that you really see across the work too. And you talked a little bit about it, when you talked about Bruce, so for example, he didn't want to be photographed, he didn't want his picture used to market the work, he would, invite stand-ins to give lectures or to show up at openings. But maybe, and he also left the art world at certain periods of time. And I think also maybe if you could talk about, the title of this talk, that I'm Not Bruce CONNER, maybe about the Bruce CONNER Convention and some of these things he did to break this myth of the successful artist. I think in the context of the Philippines, where there's currently a show at the Ayala Museum, which has no name of an artist, no title of an idea, just curated by a New York-based fashion designer, or I think it could be very interesting to talk about the counter of that with Bruce's practice.
Yeah, I mean, the story, and it's actually one that has a local connection. Bruce CONNER had a show here in Chicago, and after the opening, a couple came up to him and said, "Oh, we came to see your show because we have a good friend named Bruce CONNER, like an engineer, and we just wanted to see what this other Bruce CONNER was doing." And so CONNER started thinking, I guess there are other Bruce CONNERs out there, and he became slightly obsessed with looking for other Bruce CONNERs. And so he would go to the library, and back then libraries had telephone directories itineraries for all major cities, and he began hunting, going through them and finding other Bruce Conners. He had Dennis Hopper photograph him standing in front of signs for other Bruce Conners businesses. And he then went to send out Christmas cards to all the other Bruce Conners that he could track down, and of course sign them Bruce Conner. And then he imagined a convention, and this is very Bruce Conner-like. This would be a kind of, you might say, a kind of happening. And the happening would involve all the Bruce Conners meeting for a convention of Bruce Conners. They'd meet at, let's say, a Holiday Inn, and the sign outside would be, "Welcome, Bruce Conner." And they'd have a session, and at the session, somebody would take the minutes, and if somebody would raise their hand and go, "I move that we agree to meet for 2 days," and somebody would second it, and then in the minutes it would be Bruce Conner proposed to meet, seconded by Bruce Conner, all in favor, okay, and right, let's elect officers, President Bruce Conner, right, Secretary Bruce Conner, and so on and so forth. He loved the fact that his name was just, you might say arbitrary, that it didn't really mean anything. He also had this thing, and it really fits to Duchamp, and this is a very subtle kind of distinction he's making. He said that Marcel Duchamp created works of art by not signing them, right? By taking that urinal and turning it upside down and calling it a fountain. Or take that bicycle wheel and turning it upside down, or taking that clothes rack and hacking it from the ceiling. So this were works that were by not signing it. So he always felt that there was something false about signing an artwork. He actually, this is where he and his dealer had a parting of ways, began to refuse to sign the artwork. But said, when I sign, it basically destroys the artwork. He believed in the Duchampian method of simply finding the artwork or appropriating the artwork and not needing to sign it.
And I think, it would be great if maybe you could talk a bit, beyond being obsessed with this idea of Bruce Conners, he also worked under different aliases. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Oh, yes. Well, so toward the end of his life, he began, he retired. He claimed that he retired as an artist. In the U.S., people typically retire when they turn 65. Bruce Conner would have turned 65 in 1998. And if he had turned 65 in 1998, he would have retired and no longer made artwork. But there was still artwork, particularly these extraordinary inkblot drawings that he was doing. And in order to explain why these Bruce Conner-like drawings were entering the marketplace or being shown in exhibitions and in gallery, he had to create these alter egos. I think a couple of them were women. I think one of them was simply named Anonymous. And he continued this output until the end of his life. Under every other name except for Bruce Conner.
We'll be showing some of those as well, the 9/11 Scroll series. So that'll be interesting as well. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to open up the floor to the room in case anyone has any questions for Bruce before he goes to sleep. There must be one question.
How did he get access to the strips of film that he started collaging? I mean, what was the kind of community that he was working with?
Bruce, can you hear the question?
Diana, do you want to just repeat it briefly?
Yes, she was asking how did Bruce get access to the strips of film that he was manipulating and collaging? Like, what was the community that he was engaging with to get this material?
It's an excellent question because the Bay Area had a very active film collaborative called Canyon Cinema, right? And Canyon Cinema was basically you might say a distribution center where filmmakers, very famously like Bruce Bailey, who I think was one of the founders, they could have their films deposited there, and the Canyon Cinema would help get them rented. would collect the money and share it with the filmmakers. It also had space where you could get access to editing equipment. And if you've ever been around, this is of course now, decades out of, people don't have access this way, but when 16 millimeter films are edited, there's all sorts of, you don't need the markings at the front. I've been working for a number of years on Andy Warhol's films, and one of the things that marked Warhol a bit different from most other filmmakers is he kept in, you see these little dots that appear at the front of his films. That's the lab marking for the film stock he's using. Right? It's basically numbers that are going up sideways, and they've made a little holes punched out. So if you go into editing rooms, you'll find that kind of material, or lab markings that may say heads or tails. So it's what you call the start and the finish of the film, as well as extra countdown later. So some of it was just there for the taking. It was like art would be in the bins, in the garbage bins. The other material, though, thrills, what's it called? Chills and Thrills, and the news for 1956. Those were films that he could buy for, I don't know, like $5 or $10. They were made for people back in before video. People often had 16 millimeter projectors, and they would show films at home. And these were the cheapest possible films you could buy. And CONNER simply bought them and began cutting them up.
Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks so much for being with us. In our exhibition, we're going to be showing Breakaway, Easter Morning, and In Baton Crossroads. So those are three films that, or two films that Bruce referenced today. And at UP, they'll be doing screenings of Report. So if you want to follow up on some of the ideas that Bruce brought up, we'll send you guys more information. And thank you so much, Bruce, for joining us. And we hope to welcome you here in person sometime soon.
Diana, thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ateneo, for hosting us. Thank you so much.